A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Welcome to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. Obviously, the big topic today, Joe Biden's, quote, initial actions when it comes to firearms, including asking the Justice Department to look into the issue of, quote unquote, ghost guns and how to regulate home-built firearms. Also directed the Department of Justice to issue a report within 60 days on stabilizing braces in a pretty transparent attempt to try to place AR-style pistols and other pistols that use stabilizing braces onto the National Firearms Act as short-barreled rifles. And then I think what is the really the biggest announcement from Joe Biden, the nomination of former ATF agent and longtime gun control activist David Chipman to actually head the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. David Chipman is not being promoted from within. No. He left the ATF about 10 years ago, and he went to work for Mayor Michael Bloomberg and the gun control group Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Spent a couple of years at Shot Spotter, which is a company that sets up these things that are supposed to detect the sound of gunfire. And then he started working for Giffords as a senior policy advisor, basically a high-level lobbyist for the Giffords gun control organization. And that's where he was this week when Joe Biden said, hey, you know what? We're going to pluck you from that gun control group. And we're going to try to insert you there at the top of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. So Larry Keane, the senior vice president and general counsel of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, sat down with me to talk about Biden's initial actions, as well as the nomination of David Chipman to run the ATF. And here is what Larry Keane had to say. Larry, thanks so much for joining me on the program. It's good talking with you today, sir.
It's always a pleasure to spend time with you, Cam. How are you?
I am okay. All right, let's just get right to it. Your reaction to the announcement of Joe Biden's initial actions dealing with firearms, including the nomination of former ATF agent, gun control activist, alumni of Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and most recently Giffords' David Chipman to head up the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives.
Well, we knew the president was going to take executive action at some point, so it's going to happen in about a half hour. They've outlined what they're going to do in a press statement yesterday or last evening. So they're going to order ATF to promulgate regulations on so-called ghost guns, redefining when an object is a frame or receiver and therefore regulated under the Gun Control Act. And ATF has a long-standing definition of frame or receiver and a long understood and well understood definition. And so when something isn't quite yet to that point in manufacturing, it isn't a frame or receiver, and ATF has no jurisdiction. That's where the phrase 80% receiver came from. It's a cool, it's not a legal term, but it kind of describes that the object is, 80%, but not to the point where it constitutes a frame or receiver. So now ATF is going to move that line the direction of the White House. And that will create significant issues for the industry and the manufacturing process about when something becomes a frame or receiver, because that's when the regulations kick in, marking requirements, serialization, record keeping. And then for the DIY, people who make firearms at home, which is something you've been allowed to do in America since the founding of the country, that's going to change and alter that significantly, because apparently they're going to require that these be serialized. So these companies that make these items that have not heretofore been regulated will have to have a manufacturing license, will have to serialize them, will not be able to sell them direct to consumers, and they'll have to be sold through FFL subject to a background check. So they are, extending and will extend what constitutes a firearm, and they were essentially rewriting law, and it seems potentially usurping the role of Congress to write the laws. So that's one issue. They're also going to revisit the issue of stabilizing arm brace equipped pistols, which ATF has authorized and said is legal under the law. As you know, they started looking at that issue and trying to develop a standard at the end of the Trump administration, then abandoned that effort. So it appears that they'll have to blow the dust off of what they pulled the plug on in December and revisit that issue. But ATF has said that races are legal. So we'll have to wait and see what they plan to do. But the challenge there is that they could overnight turn hundreds of thousands or millions of Americans that have these brace-equipped pistols into felons overnight if they declare them to be short-barrel rifles, and it will no doubt expose industry members to lawsuits, like, for example, in Boulder, where they'll probably sue the manufacturer and claim that they illegally sold a short-barreled rifle in violation of the National Firearms Act, which, of course, isn't the case. They were legal to sell, according to ATF. So that's another can of worms that is being opened up. They're going to look at model red flag law. I mean, there have been efforts to do that in the past. The Obama administration offered to help the states. States don't appear to need any help to draft these laws. They have, quite a number of states have enacted so-called red flag laws, or sometimes called extreme risk protective orders. The problem is that not one of them has substantive, adequate due process for the gun owner. So they can take your firearms without a hearing before they do it. They can make you wait weeks and weeks and weeks before you have a hearing. They can seize your firearms. How do you get them back? So these laws are very problematic. And we're starting to see them be overused, it appears, in some places, like in Maryland, for example, where there have been hundreds of these extreme risk protective orders entered. And I have a hard time believing that the mental health of that county in Maryland is that bad that they need hundreds of these orders. And that's one of the fears we have. And now, turning to the nomination of Mr. Chipman, it is beyond the pale to be charitable. Imagine, Cam, the uproar if President Trump had nominated me or a CEO from industry or somebody from the NRA to run ATF. That's precisely what they've done. They've named an individual who, for about a decade now, has been a gun control advocate as well as I believe, a lobbyist, advocating for restrictive gun laws on behalf of first Everytown and now Giffords, which was founded by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords and her husband, the current senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly. So that is just beyond the pale. And I'm waiting for the mainstream media to start asking questions about that. Maybe it'll do it today at the event in the Rose Garden in a little bit. But somehow I think he's going to get a pass on that. Clearly, this is very troubling to the industry and really sets back, joint cooperative safety initiatives between the industry, the firearms community, and ATF. And I think, honestly, the men and women of ATF who have a dangerous job enforcing the gun laws deserve to have a leader who doesn't have a political agenda.
Absolutely. And you're absolutely right as well in noting that if President Trump had done the opposite, if he had, appointed you as the head of the ATF or named, somebody higher up in another Second Amendment organization. I mean, I joked about Donald Trump should nominate me to run the ATF because it was a joke. The idea that Donald Trump would nominate a Second Amendment advocate to head up that position. You're right. There would have been a firestorm of controversy. And yet even Fox News in its initial reporting described David Chipman as a gun safety advocate. They never brought up any of the quotes that David Chipman has made as recently as, last year when he mocked the millions of new gun owners in this country by saying that they were afraid of zombies. He was concerned. He had no problem with governors declaring gun stores to be non-essential businesses and closing them because, gosh, why do these freaked out people need to get a hold of a gun anyway? I mean, his attitude, as you say, is not just one of a nonpartisan law enforcement officer. He has been a partisan in favor of restricting the right to keep and bear arms for years now.
And, he's entitled to his opinions, but I don't see how he is qualified, given his background and his public position and advocacy, qualified to run ATF. And I would add to that, he has, to my knowledge, never run a large organization with a multi-billion-dollar budget. So I don't think he's qualified in that grounds alone. And if the president wants ATF to draft regulations and changing the definition of framer receiver, well, I would point out that Mr. Chipman was employed by the Gifford Center when it sued ATF over this precise issue in federal court in San Francisco, a case that is still pending. So even were he to be confirmed, which I highly doubt, he would be, in my opinion, disqualified and conflicted from ever having any involvement in that reg writing by ATF.
All right. Now, you said something really important here. You doubt that he will be confirmed. It would only take 51 votes to do so. Do you believe that he is going to have a bruising confirmation fight?
I don't think. My guess is he never has a vote on the floor of the Senate because I don't think he's confirmable. I don't think it will be agreeable to senators like Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, and others for the administration to so politicize this important law enforcement office. It is so beyond the pale. I think even Democrats will have an issue with this because what happens then when the Republicans take the White House?
That's a great question.
That comes around, and it is just so beyond the pale.
Well, and I've actually got a piece at Bearing Arms talking about how the let's say the more strident wing of the Democrat Party also should have problems with David Chipman because you've got these folks who say, look, we need to focus on de-policing. We need to focus on de-incarceration. We're putting people in prison for nonviolent offenses. Well, that's David Chipman's entire ideology. I mean, he said in a Reddit Ask Me Anything thread last year that he believes one of the most valuable things we could do would be to start prosecuting more people for carrying a gun illegally in places like New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago, where it's very difficult to legally acquire a license to carry. David Chipman is part of that ban our way, arrest our way to safety movement, which I think is diametrically opposed to what a lot of criminal justice reform Democrats are calling for. So I think, I think you're right. That there are plenty of reasons for both Republicans and Democrats, different reasons, depending on where you stand. But whether you're, pro Second Amendment or you believe in criminal justice reform, David Chipman's not the answer. Well,
and I would point out, while he was employed by the Giffords organization, and by the way, his background and resume, is still up on the Gifford site as of this morning. Giffords organization supported Black Lives Matter, which was causing the riots in American cities this summer. And the Giffords organization accused law enforcement, supported defund the police, and accused law enforcement of gun violence.
Yeah.
So this is who the administration has nominated to run ATF. I honestly believe the men and women of law enforcement at ATF deserve better than to have a leader who's so politicized and has a political agenda.
Listen, I'm right there with you, and I hope that we start to hear those voices speak out. Now, I don't want to put the cart before the horse here. The Justice Department has 30 days to come up with their report on, unfinished frames and receivers, 60 days to release their recommendations for stabilizing braces. But I have to ask, is the industry weighing its legal options? Are lawsuits on the table, depending on what the Justice Department comes out with these proposals?
We're going to have to wait. The devil's in the details, but certainly we are looking at all options to protect the interest of our industry and the millions and millions of our consumers, law-abiding gun owners. So we're going to look very carefully at what they put out. These aren't really executive orders so much as they're like directives. This is all today apparently going to be more of a dog and pony show for public relations points, because everything that they said they're going to do could have been done with an internal memo. It didn't require a Rose Garden press event. So this is being done for, to score cheap political points to advance their gun control agenda, because I think they understand that they really don't have the votes in Congress to move any of the major pieces of gun legislation they're advocating for, such as repealing the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, banning modern sporting rifles, restricting the size of your magazine and how much self-defense you're entitled to. The votes are not there to move that legislation. So they're doing this to appease Mayor Bloomberg and the gun control community.
Well, they're certainly sounding happy notes. The gun control movement is, and I do think the nomination of David Chipman is a gift to the gun control lobby as well. Larry Keane. I got my Keanes mixed up. General Counsel, Senior Vice President at the National Shooting Sports Foundation. As always, sir, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
And I just want to clear one thing up so there's no confusion. I am not applying for that job.
Thank you. I'm glad for that correction. Larry Keane joining us from the National Shooting Sports Foundation here on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Now, it's important to note here, while Larry said, and I'm very interested to see what this confirmation fight looks like, he said he doesn't think it's actually even going to come up for a vote on the floor of the Senate because he doesn't think that Chipman can get 51 votes. Biden can still name David Chipman as an acting director of the ATF without actually going through the confirmation process. Now, what's interesting is Biden could have taken that step. He could have just said, we're going to name David Chipman the acting director, and I'll submit his nomination to the Senate at some point in the foreseeable future. That's not what he did. He announced that he's nominating David Chipman as the permanent director of the ATF, which, again, does require confirmation by the Senate, bare minimum 51 votes to confirm David Chipman to that post. But it does set up the prospect of a pretty bruising fight over this nomination. Already Biden's nominee for the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, ended up withdrawing her nomination because she could not get the votes to be confirmed by the Senate. And it may very well be that David Chipman runs into that same problem. I hope that he does, quite frankly. And I would encourage gun owners, particularly those gun owners in West Virginia and Arizona, to contact their senators, including Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, urging them to oppose David Chipman's nomination. But as I said to Larry, look, whether you are a pro-Second Amendment conservative, whether you're a pro-Second Amendment Democrat, whether you are an anti-gun violence prevention advocate, there are lots of reasons to oppose Chipman's nomination. Chipman is going to say all kinds of nice things, by the way, about violence prevention efforts and how, we don't need to try to arrest our way out of the problem. That's not what he's been saying for years. And again, there's a bit of a track record, and David Chipman is fully on board. I mean, one would sort of expect it. As a former law enforcement official, David Chipman views things through a law enforcement lens. And his big idea, one of his big ideas that he brought up in that Ask Me Anything thread on Reddit, he said, I don't think anybody should be allowed to buy a gun unless it's going through a commercial firearms dealer. Now, when he says, I don't think anybody should be allowed to do that, what he's saying is, I think it should be a crime to buy a gun from your neighbor. I think it should be a crime to buy a gun from a private seller. Not allowed means it's a criminal offense. And HRA, the Universal Background Check bill that was passed out of the House a couple of weeks ago, comes complete with a federal sentence of 1 year in prison for anybody who would sell a firearm or transfer a firearm, even temporarily, without going through an FFL to run a background check beforehand. I mentioned again that David Chipman also said in that same Reddit Ask Me Anything thread that he believes one of the most important things that we need to be doing more of is arresting people who are carrying guns illegally. Now, on the surface, that might, so what? I mean, they're carrying a gun illegally. Yeah. Take Chicago, for example. In Illinois right now, the Illinois State Police, which are the ones responsible for processing concealed carry applications, they have a backlog of tens of thousands of applications. It is taking, on average, more than 140 days to process these applications, far longer than what is allowed under state law. As a result, you've got people who are waiting for months, some of whom may live in a high-crime neighborhood, who are, look, they meet all the statutory requirements, right? They've gone through their training. They're just waiting for their permission slip from the government to be able to carry a firearm for self-defense in public. Do you think some of those individuals might be choosing to violate the law and carry anyway? Not because they have any nefarious intent. They're not planning on robbing anybody or carjacking anybody. They don't want to be the victim of a robbery or a carjacking. And they would rather risk getting caught illegally carrying a gun than being murdered right outside of their home. David Chipman believes those folks should be arrested too. Matter of fact, I talk about this in a piece at Firearms today about why Democrats too should reject David Chipman. Emily Bazelon at Slate a couple of years ago wrote a fantastic piece about spending months on end in Brooklyn's gun court, which is where cases of illegally carrying a firearm without a license are covered. And what she found was that 70% of the defendants there, 70%, almost 3/4 of the people who showed up in court, looking at 3.5 years in prison because they were carrying a gun without a license that they could not obtain in New York City, were young black men without serious criminal histories. David Chipman thinks we need more of that, not less. So again, whether you're a Second Amendment supporter or you simply believe that we can't arrest or ban our way to safety, that we don't need more policing, we don't need more people in prison for nonviolent offenses, David Chipman's not your guy. All right, we're obviously going to have much more coverage at bearingarms.com and right here on Bearing Arms Cam and Company, particularly as these Justice Department reports come out and the nomination of David Chipman proceeds or not. We'll see what actually happens now that Biden has made it official. In the meantime, let's get to today's Armed Citizen story. Our good deed of the day, our recidivist report. We will start there with a case out of Ocala, Florida. Probation for an Ocala man in an armed robbery case. 22-year-old Giovanni Amani Gale pleaded no contest to robbery of the firearm this week. He was sentenced to 6 years of probation as a result. Adjudication withheld by the circuit judge, Anthony Tati, according to court records. As part of his plea bargain, Gale must testify truthfully against his co-defendant. He, by the way, was also given 655 days of credit for time served. According to the Marion County Sheriff's Office, the victim alleges that he and Gale were sitting in a car when somebody pointed a gun at his head. Victim said that the gunman demanded money, handed over the cash along with wallets. The victim said that he was hit in the face several times and that Gale and the alleged robber, identified as a guy named Isaiah Michael Bruno, then drove away in a vehicle. Gale told detectives that Bruno was the person responsible for the robbery and for punching the victim. He also said that Bruno was the getaway driver. Bruno has denied being involved in the holdup at all. He's charged with the robbery of the firearm. His case is pending. I don't like the fact that plea bargains are the primary mechanism by which criminal cases get resolved today. Something like 97% of felony cases end up in plea bargains. That's a huge issue. That needs to be addressed. But I recognize that that also is the way it is at the moment. So I'm not complaining necessarily about the plea bargain, although I don't like it. I am, however, complaining about the fact that the plea bargain resulted in no prison time for somebody who pleaded guilty to taking part in an armed robbery. I understand prosecutors want to go after Mr. Bruno. And they need apparently the testimony of more than just the victim in this case. But no prison time whatsoever? Just a slap on the wrist and, hey, keep your nose out of trouble and you're all good? Yeah, that to me seems like a recipe to see Mr. Gale back before a court here in the not too distant future. Today's Armed Citizen story from New York State, where a Monticello homeowner able to protect themselves against an intruder. This is from the Mid-Hudson News. They say the would-be robber, 28-year-old Rashane Wilson, sustained a non-life-threatening gunshot wound in his partner, 32-year-old Andrew Fogo, apparently was unharmed, but was with Wilson when the pair forced their way into a home and confronted the homeowner inside about a previous altercation. As Fogo and Wilson began beating the resident, another individual in the apartment fired a licensed gun, striking Wilson. The two men then fled and drove to a local hospital in a pickup truck. The individual who fired the weapon provided state police with all of his documentation. Again, legal gun owner acting in defense of another inside his own residence. So even in New York State, anti-gun politicians haven't figured out a way to make that a crime yet. Wilson treated and released to the hospital. Troopers took both men into custody, charged them with felony armed burglary. Both arraigned and remanded to the Sullivan County Jail in lieu of bail, which is actually surprising given New York's bail reforms. It's surprising that they are being held without bail at the moment, but I stress that that is only for the moment. Finally today, our good deed of the day from Chicago, where, as I mentioned, legal gun owners who want to carry in self-defense are being forced to wait for months. By the way, people who would like to legally buy a gun so they can eventually become a concealed carry holder are also facing those same delays because the FOID card backups are just as bad in Illinois as the concealed carry backups are. And so you do have a situation where literally tens of thousands of people who are legally eligible to purchase and carry a firearm, were it not for the fact that they don't yet have their government permission slip, are being forced to either go unarmed and defenseless or break the law by protecting themselves. The criminals in Chicago don't give a damn about these FOID delays. They don't care at all that people can't, well, I mean, they probably love the fact that people can't get their concealed carry license in a prompt fashion. Not that they're applying for their own concealed carry license, because they're not. They don't care what those laws are. They're not abiding by them anyway. And violent crime is soaring in Chicago. And one of the latest victims, a toddler who was shot on Lakeshore Drive, which is, by the way, not exactly, a high crime neighborhood, but there really are no truly safe communities in the city of Chicago right now. This toddler was shot in a road rage incident downtown Tuesday night. And CBS in Chicago says the 21-month-old boy was a passenger in a car that was shot at over the course of 2 blocks on northbound Lakeshore Drive near Roosevelt Road, near Grant Park. Child was shot in the face, once in the temple and once in the jaw, according to police radio communications. A family member then jumped out of that car, screaming for help, trying to flag down drivers on Lakeshore Drive. One car, and only one car, stopped. Its driver said he didn't think about it. Said he knew he had to do something. And so he loaded the family in his car, total strangers, and he rushed them to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The Good Samaritan said she had a baby in her arm and she was screaming and trying to get people to pull over. There were a lot of crying and screaming, my baby's been shot. She's standing there on the side of the road with the cars just whizzing by. I don't want to get involved in this stuff. And this Good Samaritan, who, by the way, does not want his name released, just wants to be anonymous, said they needed help. And it looked like nobody else was going to help them. He is now being credited with giving that 21-month-old a fighting chance. He said, once they got in the vehicle, I knew where I needed to be, and it was just getting there as fast as I possibly could. I don't know who you are, sir. I don't know what your story is, but I do know that we are grateful that you were in the right place at the right time and willing and able to do the right thing to help that family in need. That is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. I want to thank you for being a part of the program today as well. Listen, just a programming note. I'm sure I'm going to get some emails on this. You hopefully know by now, Friday's my day to stock up and try to, plow forward and write for the weekend. So we haven't done a show on Friday in the past couple of weeks. I'm supposed to take some vacation next week. More of a staycation. I'm going to be sticking around the house, going to be getting the garden and work. I've got a honey-do list as long as my arm, so I've got to take care of that stuff. So I'll be around if stuff breaks and there's, something hugely important we need to talk about. I'm not saying that there won't be a show next week. I'm saying don't expect a Bearing Arms Cam and Company next week. We will return the week after with more programming. But don't worry, we are still going to be updating bearingarms.com during my absence. I have a hard time taking a vacation. I really do have a hard time just walking away. So you might even see a story or two from me next week. But in the meantime, don't forget to continue to check out bearingarms.com, as well as subscribe to Town Hall Media on YouTube. That way you'll never miss one of these programs when we're doing them, right? As we normally do each and every weekday, with the exception of Fridays. Also, rumble.com, Bearing Arms Cam and Company. You can find us there. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, the townhall.com podcast page. Look for Bearing Arms Cam and Company there as well. Until we speak again, I hope that you are well, that you are safe, and that you are free. And we'll see you soon with another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.